Hi everyone and welcome to another comparison video here on the Merriam Pianos YouTube channel. Today we're looking at Casio's PX-870, which is the flagship in their Privia line, and Kawai's KDP120, which is brand new to the market. These two stack up so well next to each other, it was almost impossible not to do this comparison video. And I'm really glad we did. We discovered a few interesting little quirky differences that I didn't even know existed. So we'll be getting to those in the video. Watch out for that. If it's the first time that you have joined us here on the channel, we would really appreciate if you subscribed and hit that notification bell so that you're back for more videos because we love growing our community, we love hearing from people, we love sharing our love of pianos with you. Without further ado, let's get started with our comparison of the PX-870 and the KDP120 right away. So this is a good matchup. The KDP120 and the PX-870 across multiple spec points line up so well that it's a challenge to find a better race in this category in the digital piano industry other than these two. We've got the highest level of rated output power on both of these at 40 watts each. We've got, both companies choose to disclose various aspects of their tone generating technology, but from what we can discern and certainly what's published, probably the two most advanced tone generators in its category and its price. From a price point standpoint, we are very, very similar. KDP120 slightly more expensive than the PX-870. Both have a very credible triple sensor action in there, and both have attractive cabinets. So let's start by going through every aspect of these two instruments, comparing them side by side. Because if I were shopping in the market for a digital piano, not portable, but something that was going to be stationary, and I was sort of in this $1,000 to $1,500 range was my ideal budget. That's really as high as I could go, regardless of how much I loved anything. These two instruments are going to be right at the top of my list of potentials. Really solid offerings from both of these. Let's start with tone generation. On the KDP120, we have the harmonic imaging engine that Kawai's been developing and evolving for many years. Basically, that's just their trade name for the sampling-based tone generating algorithm that they use. It's basically layers a little bit of synthesis on top for things like the string resonance. But they've added a lot more over time. So there's getting close to 15 parameters now that the harmonic imaging engine manipulates or generates or mixes in and allows you actually an opportunity to edit as well on top of just the core string sample. It comes with 192 notes worth of polyphony, which is plenty if you are going to be doing some solo piano playing. And what's really notable is that we've got individual 88 note sampling on this piano. It means every single note has its own set of samples. And although Kawai doesn't disclose very specifically how many velocity layers are on here, when you play this harmonic imaging engine, there's such a smoothness to the whole dynamic range that I would think 4 is an absolute minimum. It might even be 5 or 6. They don't like to disclose that. Different companies have different things they like to hold close to their chest. That's one of them for Kawai. With Casio, they fully disclose it. So we've got this individual note sampled, multi-layer stereo sampling happening with their SKEX concert grand, 192 notes worth polyphony, and then string resonance, damper resonance, lid simulation. You've also got the headphone, I think it's SRS they call it. Basically, it's an extra layer of post-processing that occurs so that you can really get proper binaural headphone experience, and with a little bit of editability in there. And then you get something between, I think it's 19 sounds, 14, 15, something like that. It's under 20 sounds, a nice mix of acoustic pianos, e-pianos, harpsichords, you name it, in here. So it's a pretty good selection of tones. So that's what's happening with the tone generator on the KDP120. So let's hear it before we move on and talk about the same aspects with the PX-870. There's lots of cabinet string damper resonance you can hear in there, lots of really beautiful shimmer. It's a very warm sound, which comes directly from the piano they've sampled. If anyone out there is lucky enough to spend some time playing a real SKEX, you will note just how luscious a sound it is. There's so many layers of harmonic complexity happening on that piano, particularly through the mid-range and the lower mid-range. I mean, it's just like, pick your adjective, I don't know, chocolatey. I always thought that was such a funny word for people to describe it, except when it's the perfect word. And one of the things that I think has just always been one of the great hallmarks of this tone engine is the lack of any sort of a sample step as you creep up right into your top fortissimo range. I mean, that's always been one of the nicest parts about playing a Kawai of the last several years. Because even on the most advanced VST tone engines, you still, even with extensive editing to the touch curve, can still get these weird, unwanted top, triple fortissimo layers just punching out now and again. They've also now developed or included with the KDP120 sort of some lower volume. Actually, let's be honest, all the manufacturers, or at least I know for sure Roland, Casio, and Kawai now at this price point are including technology which basically levels the volume out even at a lower rate so that it feels authentic. It doesn't get so soft that you can't hear it, and it kind of lessens the effect on your playing when you are adjusting the volume up and down. Now I'm going to turn over to the PX-870 and let's just talk about what they've got going on here. So this is the air sound source and a lot of similar technologies. They have sampled a different piano. They don't have the Kawai to sample off, and judging from that lower bass tone, I mean, that sounds like a Steinway D to me. There's a very characteristic thunk that those lower few bass notes have on a Steinway D. So maybe if somebody at Casio wants to disclose that or verify that, that would be great. But to my ear, that just screamed, you know, a Steinway D, especially one that's just a few years old and it really is nicely worn in. Anyway, maybe it is, maybe it isn't. But they have sampled their 9-foot concert grand, and they've done this at 4 velocity layers. They don't specifically state, I don't believe, whether it's individual note sampling, but it certainly sounds like it could be. Playing through that break or that transition between the triple steel string into the copper is one really good way to tell whether you have individual note samples, because there is such a change in character from note to note in a relatively small space that you can really tell whether they've borrowed samples or stretching samples or whether they've individually sampled. If you hear a lot of character change from note to note, sort of anywhere in this E or F down to about the F sharp, that octave, so it's a little hard to tell. They may not be doing individual samples there, but they certainly have 4 velocity layers. 256 notes worth of polyphony on here, which is even more than the Kawai. I think most people who are familiar with this technology would agree that anything over, for individual piano playing, anything over 192 is plenty. I suppose conceivably the 256 notes is just that much more runway for you to push that tone generator. As I've often said, maximum polyphony is less about a practical limit you'll ever hit and more of an indicative spec of how advanced or how fast the tone generator is. It also has damper resonance and also has string resonance, so that is something that it is synthesizing in there as well with that tone engine. So that is a sample of the PX-870. Both these sounds have areas that I like a lot. So on the Casio, I love this tenor range. It's nicely rich. You're hearing the right balance of those extra resonances around the core tone. It's always a little hard to tell whether that's just the sampled piano or whether that's the engine that's delivering that. Of course, the reality is it's always some combination of the two, but it doesn't actually really matter because the result is what is here. Now, as you get out to the extremities of the Casio, I have a feeling there's a slightly overactive level of resonance being generated here because it's harder to hear the fundamental down in the bass, and you get a little bit of glassiness up in the top compared to over on the Kawai. You're hearing less string resonance up there and more damper resonance and more cabinet resonance, which is the reality of what you get on a real piano, typically. You know, I think on the Kawai, the true sweet spot for this instrument is more up into the kind of the alto soprano range here. And definitely the lower 2 octaves on the Kawai. It's just personal preference, but I tend to find they behave a little closer to what I want or what I expect. Another really interesting thing that I only noticed today is that Kawai and Casio are stretching their tuning differently. Again, this could be a result of the pianos that they sampled that day, which means that something as fundamental as tuning could actually be influenced by whoever the concert tech that they happened to call that day for this sample session, which is sort of an interesting concept. One piano tuning affects thousands of people's experience of a digital piano for the next multiple years. Anyway, I'll demonstrate. So, there's concert A. Pretty locked in. Now, listen to the bottom A. Hear how much sharper the Casio is? Still not locked in. Only phasing very, very little by the time you get up to that C. That's totally locked. And of course, that's usually, you wouldn't be stretching any higher than that anyway. So there's definitely some stretch tuning there. And some of that you're not going to be able to influence with any of the editing. So in a very subtle way, that's also changing how our ear hears these instruments. Same thing up here. Yeah, the Kawai's just a little bit sharper in the top, whereas the Casio isn't. So Kawai stretched the tuning, Casio hasn't. Anyway, that is a pretty good lineup or comparison of what you're hearing between the piano tones on the Casio and the piano tones on the KDP120. Let's listen to a few other tones other than the acoustic piano now. So there are, that is the SKEX, this is the EX. And then you get into some more basic sample sets. And then into the E-pianos. Here we are on the Casio. So there's their FM piano. Pretty close. There's a jazz organ. I've said this in other videos. I think for the price, the jazz organ on the Kawais is just killer. Plus, without having to do any settings, the left soft pedal triggers the Leslie on and off. So you may have some preferences on one sound versus another sound between these two, but generally the selection is pretty parallel. I mean, it's very similar. And I think ultimately most people are going to spend the majority of their time playing on the acoustic piano, which is why we've spent the majority of the time comparing the acoustic piano tones. Anyway, we're going to throw a few specs up on the screen for you right now, and we are going to move right on to action. Thanks for being with us. Both these pianos have triple sensors. Neither one of these pianos has escapement. This does not mean that they feel the same or behave the same. One of the biggest fundamental differences between these two is the key stick length or the pivot length, which is a little shorter in the Casio than it is over on the Kawai. This is going to change the sense of weight, even if technically speaking the amount of resistance it takes to get the key in motion is very similar. Your finger's sense of motion is going to be different when that lever is a different length. So I get used to both quite quickly. So this is not to say that one is somehow fundamentally flawed. I enjoy playing on both. I find that at a lower level, the Casio does feel a little heavier than the Kawai. And the impression is that the key dip is a little bit deeper as well. Both of those senses is probably coming from the shorter key stick. It's a bit more of a compact action. Not as compact as what you get in the PX-870 and 3000. That's a different action than what's in here. It almost feels a little closer to, say, the Roland PHA-4 action, for people who know that action. A little similar. And for that reason, for playing like some contemporary stuff or some R&B stuff, I think my fingers probably favor the Casio over the Kawai. But for any sort of finesse, nuanced playing, where a lot of dynamic control is needed, yeah, this is more of a finesse action. The texture on the Casio is definitely a little more obvious or a little more exaggerated than what you get on the Kawai. The Kawai has a micro texture, so neither one of these is like a high gloss. They both have a really nice sense of glide to it. And so they both feel very comfortable on the fingers. Sometimes you find actions, and this even happens on acoustic uprights sometimes, is that the plastic is such a high gloss, there's absolutely no porousness to it at all, that even when the key is clean, your finger either feels super sticky, or it can happen the opposite, where it's very, very slippery and you just feel like there's absolutely no grip on the key. That's why so many manufacturers, especially in the high end, give their key surfaces a porous texture. And sometimes the texture is so small you can't necessarily see it, but you know it's there because you don't get a good reflection. So it looks smooth, but if you can't see your face back inside it, it's not truly polished. There is some porousness to it. So this little more grain on the Casio, not so much a grain, but a texture on the Kawai. So there's our actions. Both pretty satisfying, not the same feel at all. Little bit of a heavier sense at lower volumes on the Casio versus the Kawai. Slightly shorter key stick, both triple sensor, neither one with the escapement. I'm going to be back with a third section now on other features, and we'll be covering the speakers in that section as well. So once again, thanks for being with us. See you in a minute. Now, in our discussion of sound, we skipped over a pretty critical feature, that being the speakers. Both of these have 40 watts of rated power, but the Casio splits this up into 4 speakers, whereas the Kawai splits it into 2 larger speakers. What are the effects? Well, on the Casio you have a more prominent treble because you've got some of these tone ports on the top, which allow for the release of some of those higher frequencies, and you've got 2 tweeters buried a little deeper down, so you don't have such a direct piercing sound. It is coming up a little more indirectly, but it's there as speaker number 3 and 4. And so you have nice clarity out of those top speakers. You don't have quite the same warmth and depth out of the bass because you're splitting off some of the wattage for what Casio feels is a bit more definition in that upper mid and upper frequency range. We've just got 2 speakers on the KDP120, so 20 watts a piece, so it's just a little bit beefier, and you can definitely tell there's just it's just warmer and a little bit deeper when you get down into these tones. You feel the sound a little bit more. So it does create a bit of an acoustic effect. Now, on the downside, what you do lose when you compare it to the 870 is at a lower volume, there is definitely some upper definition that you lose when you're just playing through speakers on the KDP120. Kawai, addresses this as you go up in their model lineup, of course. When you hit CN39, now you've got 4 speakers. And pretty much everything from the CN39 up, you're getting at least 4 speakers, 6 speakers, in some cases even more than that. Even in their ES 520 and 920, you've got upwards facing speakers to give you some of that really nice treble definition even at low volumes. So in a side-by-side, you can tell that you've got a little more clarity over here from those 3rd and 4th speakers. Once you get up sort of mid-volume and higher, I'd say that difference definitely decreases, if not completely vanishes, but at lower volume it's there. And on the Casio, that trade-off comes as a little less power in the bass, but if you had the 2 isolated, I'm not sure that these differences would really be deal breakers for anybody. But for people who are really focused on tone and how it reaches your ear, hopefully those observations are helpful. Besides that, they both come in a few different colors. So the Casio and the Kawai are both available in white. The Casio comes in this satin black. You can get the KDP120 in satin black, and also the rosewood. It depends on the market, depends on the website. There is 3 colors sometimes on the on the PX-870 in a rosewood as well. So you can get basically equal finishing options. They both have 3 pedals. The triple pedal system on the KDP120 is definitely more advanced, and when I say more advanced, I mean like the springs tension is matched exactly what you get on the grand piano. So the right pedal, middle, and the left don't actually feel identical, whereas on the Casio it's just like same springs, because most people wouldn't care unless you told them that you should be caring about this. But as I mentioned in a couple of other videos, it's one of those things that your foot almost subconsciously just feels a little more at home, realizing that the middle pedal is always going to be the weakest. Just like on a grand, your sostenuto, there's just not a ton of spring resistance there. Your left pedal is usually the stiffest, and then your right pedal is kind of in between the 2. So we've got that. We both have headphone jacks. The Kawai has a 3.5 mil as well as the 1/4 inch. The Casio just has the 1/4 inch, so you will need to just keep track of an adapter. That's not that unusual, but it is handy when manufacturers give you both, so you don't have to look after those adapters. Goodness knows, those get swallowed up by dark corners of your home so easily and often. They both have USB connections to the computer, so you can use these easily as MIDI outputs. They both have basic onboard recording. They're both loaded up with quite a few lesson book repertoire, so you can use them in conjunction with another learning method and kind of add some extra tools to the lesson. One big difference worth mentioning, especially for people who love getting under the hood and using all of the other tools that kind of enhance the experience of owning one of these instruments, is the apps that the manufacturers produce. The new apps from Kawai and the new apps from Casio, honestly, are probably the 2 best apps out there. Roland and Yamaha have their apps as well, but when you look at all of the boxes that these 2 companies have checked, the aesthetic, the user experience, the functionality, the stability, they've really nailed it very, very nicely. I know Roland is right in the middle of looking at next kind of generation of their Piano Everyday app, so I'm looking forward to that because functionally it's killer as well. Just the aesthetic is a little bit behind where these two are. You're going to have to use a USB cable to connect the Casio to your device. There is no Bluetooth connection for that. And on the Kawai, it's wireless. So although you can use a USB cable, the Bluetooth connection is there, and so you can use it. There is no Bluetooth audio on either one of these instruments, so you don't have that potential or that option for you. So there you have the PX-870 and the KDP120. As I said, you know, as we're going through this review, you really have two incredibly worthy contenders here, and neither one beats out in terms of the tone generator spec wise. I mean, you've got a polyphony advantage here over on the Casio, but it's not like this is like 64. 192 I think most people would agree is plenty. You've got the wattage, speaker wattage. You've got a pretty capable action in each one of these, and just for what you used to be able to get with a used acoustic piano for this price, musically speaking, I would make the strong argument that these deliver a much better experience than trying to hunt down some old 50-year-old upright piano in questionable technical shape compared to what this gives you. Consistent action every time you sit down, not having to worry about humidity and tuning. Either one is great. So the choice on these two is really going to come down to, if you know you've got a strong preference in touch, you're going to want to play both of these because they're not that close. They do feel different. If you are going to be playing this with headphones, then this is really a question of touch and the tone engine. And without, I mean, kind of comes down to whether you can just let it rip, in which case if you're going to be playing this at medium to high volumes, I think the Kawai acoustic experience of the way they've got these speakers set up, I probably prefer a little bit more. If you're going to be playing the speakers at a low volume without headphones, I think Casio's done a really nice job with this 4-speaker setup. Hope you've enjoyed the comparison and hope you're having a great day. If this is the first time that you have seen us here on the YouTube channel, we would really appreciate it if you subscribed and hit that notification bell so you can come back and join us for future videos, commenting, watching, enriching your enjoyment and knowledge of pianos, whatever context that happens to be in, as a shopper, as an owner, as a player. And we hope that you will come back to see us the next time. My name is Stu Harrison. This has been Merriam Pianos on YouTube. Have yourself a great day.